Hello and welcome to the Farming Today podcast with me, Charlotte Smith. In this episode, turkeys, tomatoes and a tractor protest at Parliament.
We feel desperately the government have got this wrong. So they're going to destroy family farms who've been working for generations on the land.
More on that later. First, though, campaigners are hailing victory in a long-running legal battle over what they call Franken-chickens, even though the Court of Appeals dismissed their case. The Humane League, backed by the RSPCA, had argued that the government acted unlawfully by allowing breeds of fast-growing chickens to be farmed. It challenged a court decision made in 2023, which ruled that wasn't the case. And in a judgment released yesterday, the Court of Appeals again ruled against the League. The majority of the billion chickens produced for meat here in the UK are one of the fast-growing breeds. Campaigners argue these Franken chickens grow too quickly and have health problems as a result. Well, they argue they lost their case on a technicality and that the judgment opens the way for private prosecutions of farmers. As they say, it says that animals who suffer due to their genes cannot be lawfully farmed. The British Poultry Council disputes that interpretation and says its members adhere to stringent guidelines, prioritising bird welfare to nurture the trust and confidence consumers have in UK welfare standards. It says it hopes that the judgment reinforces trust and helps reiterate that British poultry meat producers are committed to driving animal welfare standards. Nearly 6% of dairy producers across the UK left the industry in the last year. That's according to figures from the Agriculture and Horticulture Development Board. In Wales, the figure's even higher at 17%, according to NFU Cymru. Well, this week, our sister programme Farming Today took a closer look at the dairy industry. The amount of milk produced has stayed about the same, but the number of individual dairy farms has fallen. Marie-Claire Carey-Jones has been to meet dairy farmer and NFU Cymru Deputy President Abby Reader at her farm in the Vale of Glamorgan to find out why.
We stood in our cow shed. We invested in this about 5 years ago. There's about 120 cows in here. They've just finished milking. These cows have been with us and in my history for 100 years. It's very much a part of who I am.
What's it like, though, being a dairy farmer in this day and age?
It seems to get more and more complicated every year, and there's increasing demands of what dairy farmers have to do. There's research all the time about how we can make these cows be fitter and healthier, and we need to make sure we keep up with all of this research, and it's just about invest.
What do you find are the biggest challenges on a day-to-day basis?
Really, it's trying to deal with this ever increasing legislation. It's not just a case of you feed the cow, you get the milk and you sell the milk. It's, gosh, I now need to do this and this and this, and it's going to cost me this much money this year, and how do I afford that? And yeah, it's massive challenges.
And for more traditional family farms like yours has been, how do they fare when they're trying to get the milking contracts compared to maybe bigger farms?
So milk contracts are largely they're usually dictated by your postcode. If you live close to a motorway, you're likely to supply what we call a liquid milk market. It will go into your bottles. If you live a long way from those chimney pots, then you're probably going to supply the cheese market, which will be lower volumes of milk. And for small farms and farms that live out of the way, it is really challenging to get these contracts now.
Well, joining me here at Abby's farm is Jonathan Wilkinson, who is the chairman of the NFU Dairy Board here in Wales. Jonathan, what's the situation for dairy farmers at the moment?
I feel that dairy farming in Wales and in the UK is in a state of flux. We're looking at around about one dairy farm a week since COVID exiting the industry. We saw significant milk price change at that time, and because of the marginal nature of what we do, farmers haven't been able to absorb that degree of volatility.
Here in Wales, though, more dairy farmers are leaving the industry than elsewhere in the UK. What's specific about Wales and why people are finding it so tough?
Government policy in Wales since devolution has diverged somewhat from what's been happening in, for example, England. So we have specific policies around TB and animal disease, for one. The nitrogen vulnerable zone. The All Wales MVZ area came as quite a shock, I think, for most farmers, and the stringent water quality regulation in many cases requiring significant investment. So you've got two examples there of things that are specific to Wales. Having said that, I meet ambitious young farmers every day, so I think the future is bright, providing that they're provided with that certainty.
So Abby, could you ever see a time when you stop being a dairy farmer?
No, personally no. This is totally ingrained in everything that I do. So this is about making sure I box clever now to make sure it survives.
Abby Reader there. More on dairy on BBC Sounds. Just search for Farming Today. Fruit and veg importers say a shortage of government inspectors at ports is reducing the shelf life of products, and the current system risks spreading plant disease. At the end of April, the government introduced its new border target operating model, a post-Brexit system of biosecurity checks for goods entering the UK. It means products classed as high or medium risk have to be physically checked, including live animals and meat, as well as fruit and vegetables and some plants. Well, the government built a checking facility at Sevington in Kent and said they'd take a pragmatic approach to implementing the checks to avoid queues. Other companies have also built private inspection points where they too use government inspectors. The British Association of Tomato Growers say they're seeing significant delays in seeds and plants getting to farms, and the logistic company PMLC Frigo told Farming Today they regularly see consignments of fruit which should be inspected waiting too long for government inspectors to arrive, only to be green-lit without a check. Our reporter Theo White met with Mike Parr, their head of region for the UK and Ireland, at their base in Dover.
So what are you doing now, Mike?
Typical example, Peruvian blueberries. There's no DEFRA tape on them, so they've not been examined. They're all customs cleared, but nobody's examined them.
And when did they come in?
Oh, these have been here for a day or two, but they've already been cleared. So nobody's inspected the blueberries. Because of the lack of staff, they've just turned them green. So nobody's inspected them.
And so they'll go out uninspected.
They go out as they are.
In an ideal world, have these waited a day longer than they needed to be here? Because they should have come in, been checked and gone out. But at the moment, they've come in, not been checked, and after a day just been greened anyway.
Yes, it's delaying the fruit. It's a living product, isn't it? So it's less time it can spend on the shelf. But in this instance, nobody's looked at them because they didn't want to or they don't have the staff. So anything could be in there. It's getting to the stage where hauliers do not want to come to the UK if they have to wait 12 hours for their vehicles to clear. Because, as we say, if those wheels aren't turning, they're not earning.
Provender Nurseries in Kent imports around £3 million worth of plants every year, and a lot of this is high and medium risk and so subject to checks. To avoid goods being diverted to government facilities, they converted a warehouse at their site in Swanley so inspections could take place with the plants under their own care. While they've had no problems with getting inspectors to come, they do worry that government control posts such as Sevington are not up to the job. Stuart Tickner is the head of nursery production and biosecurity at Provender.
Very lucky we've got a very good AFRA inspector. He's here when the lorry arrives. They wait for it to be unloaded and they inspect it straight away. We've had no waiting times at all. We have had a couple of loads green lighted, but they have been the low risk loads. But all the high risk stock has been inspected.
Have you had any problems since this operation began?
Yeah, on a load come in. The pest was Picatia. We found it on the plants. We closed the control point. We isolated the infected stock. We destroyed it by fire. And then we cleaned the entire control point down and got it signed off by AFRA to start using again. Because we have the ability to offload the entire lorry, space it out, inspect every single plant, so we was able to, luckily for us, we were able to inspect the plants and save some of them.
Would that be the same at a government control post?
They won't be because they don't have the space, the facility to offload the entire lorry, inspect them individually.
Richard McKenna, Provender Nurseries, Managing Director. I do feel for the industry as a whole, there needs to be some back to the drawing board thinking.
Like what?
I'm not quite sure the buildings are fit for purpose. I think the buildings were built without engagement with the industry who actually know how to offload and reload vehicles. It sounds very simple, but the product we ship, the product we handle, it's incredibly variable. It can be one plant can be a truckload, or you can get 100,000 plants in a truckload. The facilities that are built around the ports, I don't think are fit for purpose.
That report from Theo White in Kent. DEFRA told us they're not seeing routine delays at the border and that Sevington operates a 24/7 service to cope with the just-in-time nature of supply chains. They say they're confident that capacity, including staff, is sufficient for the current volume of checks. But as I mentioned, tomato growers are worried about the way this system is working. They're particularly concerned about a plant virus and say that to reduce risk, plants are grown and then transported in batches kept separate from other tomato plants. But once they're inspected, that biosecurity is broken. Simon Conway is chair of the British Tomato Growers Association.
There's a disease called tomato brown rugose virus, which is decimating tomato crops worldwide. It is so easily transmitted. You cannot guarantee the biosecurity once that plant's looked at.
Have you had actual instances then already where that disease or any other disease has been passed on?
We haven't yet, but this is the first year this situation is arising, because before the plants would come straight through with their phytosanitary certificates and would go straight to the nurseries, which is complete. The biosecurity is not broken, so this risk wasn't there last year.
We did ask DEFRA about this, and they say the effectiveness of the import controls has been demonstrated through September and October by the interception at Sevington of 34 consignments of plants infested with a fruit tree pest native to China and present in mainland Europe. But they say those consignments were destroyed and a damaging outbreak for UK fruit growers was prevented. So they think they've got this covered.
We don't disagree that biosecurity needs to be checked. What we're saying is, because of the nature of these edible crops and the virus transition, the inspections should be done at our growers' sites. So we're asking for a derogation, really, to say that these edible crops, where we've got this specific virus risk, bear in mind, we're talking 200 hectares. This is 20% of all the tomatoes that the UK population eats are coming through the borders in these next 8 weeks. Is actually critical. And if a significant part of that crop got this virus, there'll be a severe tomato shortage next year. And this includes peppers as well, because pepper plants are included in this virus risk.
We heard in Theo's report just now a lot of frustration with the way the system's working, or some will say not working. Do your members share that?
Yes, they do. I think at the moment there's a dual issue. The plants are one thing, but what we're seeing probably more so is the seed imports. And the seed imports for growing tomatoes is in a terrible situation where we're getting delays. So it's taking up to the average of the moment about 36 days to turn that seed round from test to getting back to the propagator where they need to be grown. That delay, again, is huge cost to the tomato industry. And so half our tomato growers are seeing this delay, and it's already causing financial pain. We've not only got young plants, but we've got the delays in seed, which is causing huge issues.
Simon Conway. Farmer protests over the government's proposed changes to inheritance tax have continued this week, with rallies around the country and around 600 tractors making their way into central London on Wednesday. They arrived just as MPs were discussing the issues at the House of Commons Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee, which was looking at inheritance tax as part of a wider inquiry into the future of farming. Well, for anyone who has somehow managed to avoid this row, in October's budget, the government said that from April 2026, inheritance tax of 20%, that's half the usual rate, will be imposed on farms above a threshold of £1 million. Ministers say that when other allowances are added, the majority of farms won't be affected. Farming unions disagree, arguing that the majority will be affected and that this tax spells the end of the family farm. The NFU president, Tom Bradshaw, told MPs on the committee he'd met with the Prime Minister, DEFRA and Treasury ministers, but not the Chancellor.
There was an offer to meet from us, and the Chancellor decided not to take that. Now, if there was going to be a big change that was going to impact our sector, maybe somebody from Treasury would have had a call or a meeting.
Tom, you were reported to have met with the Prime Minister, and it was reported that he had indicated there would be a softening in the approach. Do you have any observations about that report? What
was reported, I don't think it was that there was necessarily, but it was that he was very much listening. And it is a private meeting, and I'm not going to break the trust of that meeting. But what I would say is I felt that the Prime Minister had a far better understanding of the unintended consequences by the end of the meeting than he did at the start of the meeting. But I'm very surprised that as yet we haven't had any firm action on the back of the meeting.
The National Farmers Union is calling for a pause and a consultation. Ministers have so far rejected that, saying the tax will raise much needed cash, around £500 million a year, and will also discourage people aiming at avoiding inheritance tax from buying up farmland and so driving up the price. But Dr Aaron Advani, director of the Centre for the Analysis of Taxation, CENTAX, told the committee that may not be the case.
I think the concern with the way the reform has been done is that it still leaves a 20% effective rate. It's not quite how it works, but roughly a 20% effective rate above the threshold that's been set. Now, one reason for doing that is because there are farmers who you might be concerned about who are earning, who have wealth a bit above the current tax-free threshold, who you want to give a lower rate to because of the well-documented concerns about incomes of farmers. But the downside is it still means that if you have, say, £100 million or £1 billion that you want to put into farmland, 20% rate is still much more attractive than other sorts of assets. And so what you will still have in this world is people who want to buy up agricultural land competing with genuine farmers who are trying to expand their farm, who are really actually wanting to work on the land. They're still going to have to compete with much better off people. One other just quick thing to add is that this came in a budget in which there were other reforms, removing some of the relief around pensions and also bringing former non-doms into inheritance tax. And so there are actually more people now who will be looking for ways to reduce their inheritance tax bill, which might, if anything, drive up the amount of demand for agricultural land that's still relatively tax privileged.
Well, we did ask to speak to a DEFRA minister about the inheritance tax. No one was available. In a statement, the Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Steve Reed, reiterated that the government's commitment to farmers is steadfast. He went on to say that the delayed higher-tier stewardship scheme will now open in the summer, which, he said, is part of our £5 billion farming budget over 2 years, the largest ever directed at sustainable food production in our country's history. As we set out our plan for change, we're focused on supporting our farmers, supporting rural economic growth and boosting Britain's food security. Well, MPs can't have missed the frankly surreal sight and noise of hundreds of tractors driving past Parliament in protest. Organised by grassroots farming campaigns, the aim was to demonstrate the strength of feeling in farming communities. I went along and spoke to one of the organisers, Dave Catt, who farms and runs a wholesale veg business in Kent.
As an industry, we feel desperately the government have got this wrong. They haven't thought the consequences through. They're trying to target big money and people using the land as a tax loophole. But what they're actually going to do is they're going to destroy family farms who've been working for generations on the land.
Look, you are rich people who can afford to take on this because of the state of the public finances.
The land is worth a lot of money if you sell it. If you're a generational farmer, you're born on that farm, you grow up on that farm, you die on that farm. You live there for generation to generation, you earn a living. The value of it is irrelevant. I know it's worth a lot of money, but it's irrelevant to what they do. This tax will then hit people who can't afford, the farm incomes can't afford to pay that sort of tax. So therefore, they then cut the size of the farm by having to sell some farm off to pay the tax. Then it's not viable, then it's finished.
I'm just outside the gates to Downing Street, and as you look up and down Whitehall, it is covered in tractors. They're coming from all over the country for practical and logistical reasons, obviously, mainly from the southeast of England. I've spoken to a few people here, and they say they're here fundamentally because they're furious.
I think it's a fact of, I think ours is mostly inheritance tax and just what happened to the family farm. So me and my other half, so he is the 4th generation of the family farm. I'm pregnant, so I'm bringing in the 5th generation, and we want to make sure he can carry on, or he or she can carry on farming the family farm and keep it running.
The government will say, well, you've probably got a lot of time to plan for that handover. You've got a lot of time. If you've got 7 years, the farm can be gifted. There are things you can do to manage this.
There is. I think it's just a fact of when we looked at it, because we've sat down as a family, obviously, and had a look. It's my husband's grandfather that owns the farm. If he passes away, it's a lot more we've got to sell. So I think when we worked it out, all of our cows have got to go to be able to manage. And what's the point of being a milking dairy if you've got to get rid of most of your animals to just carry on?
Why do you see it as an attack on farmers?
Well, they're just trying to grab money where they can. They probably see us as an easy target. Like a lot of people, they think farmers are worth millions. Yeah,
to be fair, lots of you are on paper worth millions.
Yeah, if we sold up and gave up farming, then yeah, we would be. But our income from it is very little.
Andrew Ward, I'm an arable farmer from Lincolnshire.
You organised the last protest that was held here in London.
Yeah.
Here you are at another. It's not working.
It's not working, and we always thought it would be an uphill struggle. And I think the most important thing is there's lots of these protests going on now around the country leading up to Christmas. And I think we've just got to keep plugging away and just keep nudging. All it is at the moment is nudging the government to say, hang on a minute, we're here, we're not going away.
Some of the farmers in Whitehall earlier this week. Well, on hearing that, lots and lots of people got in touch with us. Peter Gaskell wrote to us to say, I'm sorry, but I'm sick to death of hearing farmers bleating on about how hard done by they are. The tax is at half the rate of anyone else. Why? And they get 10 years to pay it. No one else does. Marco added, farmers will have to sell land to pay this tax, making them less viable. And the sale will be bought by hedge funds who will sell to the highest bidder. I'm not a farmer, but I can see that this idea is a stupid one. Gordon Rennie emailed us. He says, prior to 1992, farms and farmers were not exempt from IHT. So how on earth did 4 generations survive? The one big positive today, he says, is that up and down the UK, farming families are having conversations and meeting their accountants to do what some should have done years ago: make a plan. While Jan Dryberg emails from Edinburgh, our farmers are the guardians for the future of our great country. We must support them. We will, of course, be coming back to this issue and answering all your questions about it. So if you have comments or queries, do get in touch. You can email us. We're farming.today@bbc.co.uk, or you can tweet us on X, where we are @BBC Farming Today. Now, 'tis the season when Christmas turkey farmers are at full stretch across the country as they get their birds ready for sale. 2 years ago, it was a very different picture. There were warnings that there could be a turkey shortage after millions of birds died or were destroyed because of avian flu. In November 2022, the British Poultry Council said the UK had lost 40% of its free-range turkey flock. Well, one of the farmers we spoke to for a special programme back then was Norfolk producer Steve Childerhouse, who lost his whole flock of thousands of birds in September that year.
One day they'd be really chirpy, and then the next day you would come here and it would just be quiet. I remember going out from my house early one morning and stood on our drive, and this shed of turkeys on the end here. Every morning you would hear the chirping, and it was just a death of. There was nothing. It was just silent, and. Yeah, that was hard. It was really hard. Yeah, a lot of them died, unfortunately.
Steve Childerhouse. Well, he had to leave his traditional turkey sheds empty for a year to make sure the virus was gone. So it's taken 2 years to recover. Anna Hill has been back to see Steve and his partner Sarah. The farm was silent again, but for a completely different reason. This time, the thousands of turkeys are plucked in the chiller, ready for Christmas.
All of your turkeys are hanging up here.
This is obviously what we want, because they're in here now, hanging here, and this is how they mature, like a piece of beef, and it just enhances the flavour, and that's exactly what we want.
Take me back to when we last talked to you. It was a really, really awful time for you. You'd just been completely wiped out by avian flu, hadn't you?
Yeah, that's right. It was very painful to start with when it all happened. Next year we weren't allowed to be at this farm to start rearing it again, so I had to find somewhere else to do them. We got a neighbouring farmer who was very good to us, and he let us go down and use his buildings.
Sarah, does it take courage to take up the same thing where you've had a disaster before?
Definitely, and yeah, he's done really well to get where he has done today, which is, it's lovely to see, and it's great to see all the birds back here this year. It's great to see them all outside again in the woodland and running around and healthy and loving it, really.
It's quite important, isn't it, the environment that they're in, that they're back on this farm, because you are well known for having your birds free range, really free range, out in the woods.
Yeah, it's so nice to be back here, and that whole feeling of seeing the birds all out like they used to be here. This year has been brilliant.
As you're walking down the track in the morning, you suddenly hear them and they all sort of follow you around, and I go for my morning walk and they come and walk around the field with me. It's lovely.
This year, avian flu is round and about again. How are you feeling about the way things sit at the moment?
Obviously, everyone would like to have a vaccination, for sure. I often say it, until you've actually gone through it, you don't realise how hard that is to come back from it without the support of people. I mean, the guy who works for us as well, I mean, just keeps going, even when things get a little hard, come on, let's get going again, come on, let's do it, But yeah, now it's good and we're back to where we want to be, so which is great.
Happy Christmas.
Thank you, and to you.
Steve Childerhouse there in Norfolk. That's it from us. I'm Charlotte Smith. The producer was Beatrice Fenton, and Farming Today this week is a BBC Audio Bristol production.